Hello and welcome to this week's video. Another short motorcycle story. Stories about things that I've done whilst restoring motorbikes. This one's called The Monster. I quite fancied, at a particular time, a BMW 1100 GS. Started looking round at them and found one in London that was a bit of a state. It was cheap, it looked quite well worn, and the bloke didn't want a lot of money for it. So I phoned him up, had a chat with him, quite a nice bloke, and he just told me that he'd been using it for running around London and basically hadn't looked after it, just used it, and he was willing to take 1,400 quid for it. So I went, yep, I'll have that, and I went to London, picked it up, brought it back home on the trailer. When I got it back home, I couldn't believe how tall it was. I couldn't get on it. In fact, I managed to sit on it when it was on the stand, and I noticed there was like a mist on my lips. Yeah, that was the clouds. It was so tall. I couldn't ride it. It was too tall for me, too dangerous. I wasn't going to use it or ride it or anything like that. I literally wanted it for bits and pieces. But when I started looking at it, this bike was a bit special. It wasn't a normal 1100 GS that had been mistreated. It was an 1100 GS that had had thousands spent on it. Virtually every Touratech part in the catalogue was fitted to this bike. Bearing in mind this is a long time ago. It had Olin shocks, it had Touratech guards on the footrests and the rack, it had a Touratech instrument display, and it had an electronic map that you could read whilst you're riding and then advance it with a little button on the handlebar, like two rollers. Absolutely brilliant tool. But what made it amazing was that every single connection in the loom was sealed with the instant gasket, like a sealer, like a silicon sealer. And on the breather, on the diff, there was a hose which ran the breather hose right up to the top, so therefore gave me the impression that this bike was intended to go through water, rivers or floods or that kind of thing. When I'd done some research, it had a 40-litre Touratech tank fitted. When I'd done some research, apparently this bike had been to Morocco. That's interesting. I wonder if it was anything to do with the Paris-Dakar rally, whether it was a support bike or used to sort of like, you know, run people around or whatever. I don't think it was a bike that actually physically took part in the rally, but I definitely think that it was something to do with the rally, and it had certainly been prepped up to an amazing standard. Anyway, I got to the stage where I decided that I was going to break the bike up because there were several parts I was going to use on my own bike. So I started selling bits off, and bits were selling so fast and I was getting such good money for them because they were all Touratech and unusual. The tank made over 400 quid, just the tank, because they were difficult to get hold of. In the end, I got down to the engine and the gearbox. The one thing I didn't realise, it had chrome covers on the engine, on the heads. I took those covers off and I put them on my own bike because they were beautiful, but they didn't fit properly. But I did manage to get them to fit. I had an 1100 at the time. I couldn't understand why they didn't fit as well as what they should have. And then later on, some years later, I suddenly realised why. The engine was probably a 1200C engine. I wish I'd have known that it was a 1200C, because I would have put that in my 1100 RT. What a shame, because I sold that for 160 quid. So somebody had a bargain, didn't they? But yeah, another interesting story. A bike that I just bought to break up into bits and pieces because I wanted a few spares ended up being a bike that made me quite a lot of money and was very, very interesting. I should have ridden it really, but I didn't have any stabilizers and I was too scared. Anyway, that's another story from Motorcycle Stories. See you again next Monday with another one. Take care. See you soon. Bye.